Okay, in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. The series we want to do, I'll do this at the end. The series we want to start talking about is, and Peter did it a couple of weeks ago, we started talking about different heresies in the early church. Come on in, John. Some of the heresies in the earlier church. And I thought we'd continue the series and talk about this heretic named Pelagius. And before we kind of get to this heretic, we'll talk sort of about what the heresy was about. And the idea is this question of grace and free will. And this is an old problem in the church, this idea of grace and free will. How free is man? How free is our free will? And how much does God interfere or get involved in our lives? And so if you want to, I thought this was cute. I had it up with all you yes men, I'm going to create something with free will. So the question is, if you want to put it very simply, if I see someone living a good life who's free from sin, is that person good because of God's grace, i.e. God is helping him live a good life or her? Or is this person good because of a personal and constant struggle with sin? So that's the question. Are you good? Are we living a good life because God is helping us live a good life? Or are we living a good life because we are struggling and personally putting in the effort to resist sin? Which one do you think? Both. Both. That is the correct answer, right? And it's always been both. And the philosophers and the early theologians of the church, we sort of had this debate, right? You know, because you see someone who's sinful, and you think to yourself, well, why isn't God helping them? Well, why aren't they helping themselves? And then you see someone try to help themselves, and they say, I can't do it by myself. So there's this, if you will, there's a synergy that comes between God and man in working together, and when we live a spiritual life, we start to see how clear and easy this answer is, right? So, see, Uncle said it was both, and he said it just very quickly. That's sort of that's the answer of experience, right? Because when we've lived a spiritual life, we know that we tried it on our own many times and fail miserably, right? And I remember Pope Shenouda used to have a nice way of saying this. He would say, look, God doesn't want you to say, look, God, you want me to be good, I'll be good. You just sit back there and wait for me and watch me. I'm going to do great. I'm going to do great things, and you'll be proud of me. That's not the way God wants the relationship to happen. It's a relationship, right? We put our hand in God's hand, and we work together. So this heretic Pelagius, and I'm going to put little quotes around his name, around the word heretic, just for a second. But he had an interesting theory. He was born in England, actually, in the 4th century. And he was accused... There she is. I'm here. Hi. So he denied the need for divine aid in performing good works. So Pelagius was... he was accused of this, but he basically said, look, we don't need God's help in doing a good work. Let's do it ourselves, right? And through our own work, we can sort of achieve salvation, okay? Now, recently, people have started reading some of his works, most of which were destroyed, but recently people have been reading his works, and they're thinking that maybe this guy is highly orthodox, right? That some of his thinking isn't as heretical as we once may thought it was. And after he was expelled, so this is sort of the life history of him, after he was expelled, St. Cyril of Alexandria actually brought him to Egypt and said, you can stay here and live in Egypt. So he actually lived in Egypt until he passed away. But his basic heresy was that we don't need God, right? That we don't need God, that we can do this ourselves, okay? And some have said he's possibly a misunderstood Orthodox. So some of the things that were good about Pelagius, he opposed the idea of predestination. So now remember, if you take this idea of grace and you take it to its logical conclusion, so imagine with me for a moment, I say, I'm only good because God made me good. Okay? Now, if that's the theory, if that's the belief, then if I'm only good because God made me good, well then, who gets to be good and who doesn't get to be good? Well, it must be that God picked some people to be good. He gave them grace, and there's some people he didn't pick to be good. And if you kind of logically flow with this, you end up where Calvin ended up, right? Which is predestination, which is saying God predestines some people to be saints, and he predestines some people not to be, right? So if everything comes from God, and I have to sort of wait for it to come from God, well, it goes to some people, it doesn't go to other people, right? And so Pelagius really opposed this idea, and he opposed the idea of predestination, and he said, no, we have a very strong free will, and he really asserted this strength of the free will, which I think is very important. He was a moral ascetic monk, so he was a monk who lived a very moral, a very tough life on himself. He denied the theory of original sin, and again, this is something that the Orthodox Church doesn't really accept, this idea of having an original sin, that everyone's born with some sin. The Church doesn't say that we're ever born with a sin. You can't be condemned for someone else's sin. So we're not born with some original sin that we have to get rid of somehow, right? But rather we have a fallen nature and we take on the nature of Christ. So the question, and I don't want to get into sort of the history and the politics of what happened, but we'll let the Lord judge him. Lord him. But so the question I want to ask all of us personally is, what about this heresy? Right, this heresy that I can do it. Right, I don't need God. And then I want to ask all of us, am I Pelagian? Right? Do I believe in the Pelagian heresy? And I have to admit that personally, I have fallen into this heresy many, many times. Many times in a spiritual life. Right? Many times I have said, I'm going to do it. Right? And I deny and I push aside God's ability, right? And I do this over and over again. And every once in a while, God in his grace, as Abuna was sort of saying today in the sermon, lets me fall on my face. Or he knocks on the door a little hard, right? Or he allows something to happen to me, as today we read in the Gospel of the widow of Nain, where her husband dies, and then God's knocking, she's not listening, so then her only son dies, and now she's listening. Right? So sometimes God allows these things to happen because we all fall into this heresy, don't we? Right? We all say, I can do this. I'm going to do this. Right? And I kind of want to talk about a couple of stories that I think kind of illustrate how all this happened. This story actually, Abu Antonius Hanin told me about himself. You all know the story, the church, St. Mark's Church in Robertson in L.A. It's the first church in L.A. And Abu Shoy Kamil, God rest his soul, was here, and he was the one who sort of built that church up. Negi came from that church, so look at the fine product that comes from. Anyway, so when they were buying this church, they had put down some money, I guess some earnest money or something along those lines, and it was a lot of money. And they needed to come up with the rest of the down payment by some date. And they needed something to the tune of $10,000, and it was exactly $10,000 that they needed, and they didn't have any of it, but they needed to get it within a month. And so Abu Antonius Hanin was telling you the story about himself, and he was just an engineer at the time. He was a lay person. He wasn't a priest yet. And he said, so I told Abu Shoy Kamil, I said, we really need to come up with these $10,000. We need to figure out a way to get this, or else we lose our deposit and we lose the property. And Abu Shoy Kamil said, we just need to pray. And so Abu Antonius Hanin, or Nabil as his name was at the time, said, well, no, okay, we got to pray, of course, yeah, but if we don't get the $10,000, this is America. In Egypt, these dates slide. In America, this is a hard close. If we don't have it by this date, we lose our money, we lose the property. And Mushoy, just pray. And so Abu Shoy refused to allow himself to get sucked into this. We need to, rally the troops and do everything else. So Abu Antonius Hanin said, at that moment, he thought to himself, okay, This old man doesn't get it. We're going to lose this property. He doesn't understand what's happening. I'm going to go out and borrow the $10,000 myself, figure out a way to get it, and then I'm going to pay this. Right? And so he said he sort of thought this in his head very quickly while Abunas was saying, let's just pray, let's just pray. So immediately Abuna B'Shor Kamel turned to him, looked him in the eye at that moment and said, and you do not have permission to put the $10,000 into the pot. So we're going to get the $10,000 and you can't get it. And I forbid you, andak shihil in Arabic, right? You have no absolution to put the money in yourself. So Abuna was like stuck. He's like, okay, fine. Let him see how it works in America. Fine, right? So of course, we can imagine how the story ends. The day before it's done, Abuna Tunis Hanin is like, that's it. We're going to lose the property. I told him it's not like Egypt. He's not listening. Blah, 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 blah. Someone shows up to Abuna B'Shor Kamel and says, I'd like to donate. And Abuna B'Shor Kamel, without opening the envelope of cash, says, I want you to go give this to Nabil, the engineer, who's, Abuna, and I want him to count it. And he didn't even open the envelope. And he says, why don't you give it to him, let him count it. So he hands it to him, and of course it's exactly $10,000 the day before. Right? So these are the kinds of stories that when you look at the way churches are built, most churches, there's a dozen of these stories for every church built. There's actually a couple of dozen of these stories for every church built. Right? And the problem with us is we become Pelagians. We forget God and we rely on ourselves. And God then sends us these little pulls at us just to say, yeah, you know what, you're not going to do this on your own. In fact, I'm not going to let you do this on your own. It wouldn't be good for me to let you do this on your own. I'm going to have to force you to see my hand, right? And this is the verse that the psalmist says, David says in the Psalms, and who can finish it for me? Unless the Lord builds the house, who knows the rest of it? In vain do they labor who build it, right? And when we were working on the church in Seattle, every meeting we began the building committee, this was the verse on the top of our letterhead, right? Lest any of us think that we were building the church, right? So this is a common spiritual problem, right? This relying on oneself, relying on your own strength. Okay. And then thankfully the Lord loves us like a father. And you can imagine how a father treats a son who thinks he knows it all, right? And we see this, right, even with our kids. Every once in a while, you'd be showing your kid how to do something like a Lego. You're putting together Legos for your son or something. And then your 6-year-old says, Dad, I don't need you anymore. I can do it on my own. Right? And you've been doing the whole thing the whole time. And he just yells at you, pushes you aside and says, I'm going to do it. So what does the loving father do? Go ahead. Give it a shot, right? For 2 reasons. One, I kind of want you to work on this on your own because you need to learn how to do it on your own. But number 2, I want you to kind of see that you were very rude to me a second ago, and that maybe you can't quite do this on your own, and that you do need the loving hand of your father, right? So we do this all the time. We brush aside God, and we say, I'm going to do this. And God says, absolutely. Go right ahead, right? And he lets us fall, right? And so part of our spiritual life, and we often, Abuna today very nicely gave us the perspective of the life on earth, and he was trying to make this point, and life on earth, God doesn't exist to make our life on earth easy. Life on earth isn't the goal, right? And so a lot of times our prayers are directed towards the life on earth, right? And I heard a very nice, analogy. It's like when you take a little kid and you say, here's a $100 bill, or here's a shiny red piece of paper. Which do you prefer? And oftentimes the kid picks the shiny little red piece of paper, right? And he says, I really want this shiny red piece of paper. And you said, you know what? The paper's nice, but this is a $100 bill. This can buy you something. This is money. This is what we call currency. This is valuable. He says, but I really like this shiny red piece of paper. And so the kid leaves the important thing And he likes the wrapping that the $100 bill's in. And we do this all the time. We pray to God with our hands outstretched, and we ask for something. And what do we ask the God of gods to do? Can I get a raise? Right? And it's like you going to a king, not just any king, the king of the Roman Empire. And you say to him, could you give me a piece of chocolate? And the king says, I can give you anything you want, anything you ask for, son. What do you want? And you say, I'd like a piece of chocolate. And he goes, really? That's what you're going to ask me for? You want a piece of chocolate? And don't we do the same thing in our prayers? Right? We stand before the King of Kings and we say, I really want this girl to like me. Or I really want this promotion. Or I really want a new whatever. We're asking for silly things, right? For things on earth, right? And God's looking at us like, no. This whole earth thing, this whole life thing, it's to get you to see me. Not for me to make the whole life thing, facilitate it for you and make it go smoothly and help you to get the promotion and to sit on the office with the window seat and, get the nice chair at your desk, right? So anyway, we do this. And sometimes, like a loving father, every once in a while we think to ourselves, once we've lived a decent life and we start to get past some of our sins, if you ever think your sin is past, the first thing the Lord sometimes does is he withholds his grace from you just for a second. And he lets you fall into that sin again. And again, it's the exact same thing. Don't forget that I'm here. Don't try to do this alone. And this is why those of us who have experienced the spiritual life know that the answer is always both. Because we've all tried it on our own, and we've all fallen miserably on our faces when we tried it on our own. So the person who opposed Pelagius was Augustine. And the Eastern Orthodox Church, and I think the Coptic Orthodox Church as well, we don't actually call him Saint Augustine. We call him Blessed Augustine. Not that I understand the difference between saint and blessed, but it's a small difference in title. And the reason is, Augustine really opposed Pelagius. So we said Pelagius believed in man's free will, the strength of man's will. And Augustine came and opposed Pelagius in such a way that he said, no. Man is nothing. Man can't do anything. Man is incredibly weak. These are all true statements. It's God's grace that does it all. Right? Now, he never actually came out and denied man's free will, but the fathers say that he exaggerated the role of grace. He talked so much about man's grace that he sort of left this idea of free will alone. So in the church, we say that Augustine never denied free will, but he exaggerated the role of grace in man's salvation and downplayed free will and man's involvement. So there's a great book on this topic if anybody wants to read it by Father Seraphim Rose. It's called The Place of Blessed Augustine in the Orthodox Church, and that book very clearly sort of explains this concept. But if you want to look at sort of the continuum of grace versus free will, over there on the left you see free will alone, which means this is man's strength, right? And the Pelagius was, way over here on that side of the argument. And then on the other side, there's God's grace alone. Man is terrible. Man is horrible. Man can do nothing on their own. God does everything. Okay? And again, that's sort of like sitting back, folding your hands, and you're saying, God, you want me to be good? Okay, make me good. Go ahead. Have at it. Right? And doing nothing on your own. Right? Augustine, I think, sort of came in. He didn't go all the way over to the grace alone, but he was just to the side of orthodoxy. And orthodoxy is very much in the middle, right? As Uncle said very quickly, both, right? We believe that both of them have to work together to fulfill God's will. So the person I want to talk to is a guy named St. John Cassian. Has anyone ever heard of him? St. John Cassian? So he's a great saint. So he's a Western guy, right? He was from Rome. He's a Western thinker. He writes like a Western guy. But what he did is he went to Egypt and he interviewed all of the ascetic fathers. And so his book is called The Conferences, and it's just a bunch of interviews with ascetic fathers. What's really cool about the way St. John Cassian writes, and maybe why I like him so much, is that he really appeals to a Western mind, because he writes that way, right? So he writes in that very logical kind of Western way, but he writes, the content of what he's writing is very Eastern Orthodox, sort of a mystical. He's talking about mystical things in a very Western way, if you will. So he interviewed all these monks, and then he would just ask them questions, right? And then he'd wait for their answers. And sometimes these interviews would take days, right? So he would throw out a question, and the monk would say, let me talk to you about it tomorrow. And then the monk would talk to him for a while. He'd write down what he said, and he goes, okay, that's enough for today. Let's talk tomorrow. And it would take days, these interviews, right, while the monks sort of prayed and thought about what they were going to say. But his 13th conference was on this topic of grace versus free will. That's his icon there, and that's the book, The Conferences of St. John Cassian. So he has one of sort of the best sources on this topic. And what he writes is, so he starts out, and basically the question is, for it is foolish if, when, for example, we see a farmer taking the utmost pains over the cultivation of the ground, we do not ascribe the fruits to his exertions. Right? So he's sort of throwing it out at the monk, saying, we say God does everything, God did this, God did that, but if I see a farmer and he's working his tail off, right, and he's exerting and he's toiling on the ground, and then the fruits come out, can we say that as he says it, we do not ascribe the fruits to his exertions? Does that make any sense? That we see a farmer work, and then when the fruit come out, say, oh, you didn't do anything, And that's sort of what, he's sort of challenging the monk, because that's what we say about us, right? When something good comes out of us, I say, oh, no, it wasn't me, it was God. He said, but you can't really say that, can you? Because clearly the farmer worked, right? So he throws it out there just to kind of challenge the monk a little bit, which is nice. And then the monk thinks about it for a day, and he comes back the next day, and he says, for neither can the farmer, when he's worked hard in cultivating the ground, immediately ascribe, sorry, the English is a little tough, immediately ascribe the produce of the crops and the rich fruits to his own exertions, as he finds that these are often in vain unless opportune rains and a quiet and calm winter aids him. So he said, yes, the farmer can't take all the credit, but he certainly, he can't ascribe it all to himself, because he had to have rain and he had to have a calm winter. If it was stormy all winter long and winds and tornadoes and hurricanes or whatever, then he wouldn't have had any crops, right? So what he's basically saying is, yes, the farmer worked, but God facilitated the big picture. Wow, that was quick. They're done. But God facilitated the big picture for them, right? So he allowed the environment in which the farmer to work to produce those fruits. Okay. And the point he's trying to make is, the Lord is nourishing us and sort of facilitates this for us. Oh, what? Fall down, go. All right. Okay, we're almost done. Who would be, and then he says, who would be sufficient without God's grace to give continual attendance to reading and constant earnestness in work? So then he takes it a step further. So he said, not only did God give the rain and the calm winter, right? But this farmer had to get up every morning and try, right? And we have to do the same thing in our spiritual lives. We have to get up every morning, and we fall, and then we get up again, and then we fall, and we get up again. And it can be a very frustrating process, right? Those of us who've experienced this know that, when you're trying to get over something, a mistake you're making, a sin you're committing, it's frustrating to keep falling, right? Who is it that gives me the strength to keep getting up, right? And he says, again, God's grace, right? The farmer who keeps getting up. So he says, who would be sufficient without God's grace to give continual attendance to reading and constant earnestness in work, right? So clearly it's God's grace that's giving us the strength to continue. So even though it is my effort, first of all, God sort of sets the tone for the environment I'm in, and then he gives me the strength to get up and to continue in that effort that I do have to do. Another quote. And when he sees us in some beginnings of a good will, he at once enlightens it and strengthens it and urges on towards salvation, increasing that which he himself implanted or which he sees to have risen from our own efforts. So now he starts to see that spark in us, right? That me, between me and myself saying, you know what, I'm going to change, right? I'm going to change. I'm not going to do this anymore. He sees that spark, and again, God's grace flows in, and as he says, at once enlightens it and strengthens it and urges it on. Becomes the cheerleader, right? Becomes the gasoline on the fire, right? He sees the flame and he just fires on it, right? So again, we are that little flicker, right? If you will, that little flame, and we say, you know what, I'm going to change, I'm going to be better, I'm going to do something different, and then God sees that, and his grace, again, abounds. And as Abuna once said in one of his sermons, he says, grace is found in plenty, right, in the weakness of man, right? Where there's sin, that's where God's grace is found. It's abounding there, right? Because that's where God is blowing and kindling this little flame. And then finally, I just want you to notice the order. Again, these are just nice quotes. The conference is huge, but I thought I'd just pick out a few. For he says, before they cry, I will hear them, and while they are speaking, I will hear them. Right? So this sort of answers the question of, and this is, I still have more, don't I? I do. This sort of answers the question, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? Am I crying to God because God inspired me to cry to him? Again, this is very philosophical stuff, right? Or did I start and then God helped me, or did God help me to start? Which one came first? And you can see these philosophers sort of thinking about this stuff. And he answers it with this verse, for before they cry, I will hear them. So before you speak, God hears you. And while they were speaking, I will hear them. So both, right, is sort of the answer, right? And we don't try to philosophically, analytically break down this moment, but rather it's a synergy between God and man that exists. And then I'll just say a few verses quickly. He says, if you be willing and hear unto me, you shall eat the good things of the land. So again, God's saying you have to be willing, so you have to do your part. And if you do hear me, then you'll eat the good things of your land. God will render to every man according to his work. So this is what we say in Romans. So we can't deny the works of man, right? God will render to each man according to his works, to his deeds. So we can't just say it's God's grace that saves, but rather the Bible is very clearly saying there's something to our own works. It is God who works in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. Now he just flips it in Philippians. Same Paul, same person, now saying something else. It is God who works in you. Right? So he just said works are what save you, but then he says it's God who works in you. Right? So it isn't even your works, it's God's works in you. This is not of yourselves, but is the gift of God, not of works, that no man may boast, right? So this is not of yourselves. So even the works and the things that you create are not of yourselves, they come from God. And finally, draw near to the Lord, and he will draw near to you, right? Again, man works, God works, right? And the reverse of this verse is true. Pull away from God, right? And you basically pulled away from God, right? And God will still try to draw near to you, but unfortunately. Okay, last one. No one cometh unto me except the Father who sent me, draw him. So again, look at the wording. No one comes unto me except the Father who sent me, draw him. Right? So the Father sends me and I draw him. Right? So again, you see this interplay, right? The verses are flip-flopping. One, it's one way, one is the other way. So there's no one direction in the Bible. The Bible clearly gives us that both of them, as Uncle said earlier, is the answer, right? That there's a synergy between God and man. So I think that's the end of my the presentation. But the only point I want to make just one last time is the importance on seeing God's hand in ours. right? As soon as you think you're going to do it on your own, that's when you run into problems, right? And that's when it is out of God's love that he almost has to let you go, right? Because if you say, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do this, it's my ability that's doing this, I'm a saint, right? If God loves you, he can't let you do that. He has to pull back a little bit, let you fall, and let you see the reality of the situation, which is we are being carried by God's grace on every dimension. But we can never stop our own efforts at any point in time and say, God, you do this for me, right? I have to carry that burden. I have to do that work. Does anybody have any questions? Comments? Okay. Oh, yeah, Mia. St. John Cassian was like the 4th century, around 364 or something. I think I had it somewhere. No, I didn't write it. Like the 4th century. Any other questions? Okay, kids are here. Let's stand up and pray. Make us worthy to say with all thanksgiving, Our Father who art in heaven,